In the early years of the 22nd century, during the human year 2137, something unwanted was pushed out of the dark and sent toward a small blue planet that barely mattered to anyone beyond its star system. Far away, in a region of space labeled Alien Sector 9, a damaged ship drifted near the edge of a forgotten orbit. Sector 9 was not a place of pride. It was known among the Varkeen collective as a dumping zone, a low-value industrial sector where failed machines, rejected experiments, and outdated vessels were sent away so they would not waste space or resources elsewhere. What floated there now was one such failure, a ship officially registered as Scrap Vessel VX-71. The planet closest to the dumping route was Drathos Minor, a cold and nearly lifeless world used only as a navigation marker. From its orbit, the Varkeen automated disposal systems released VX-71 without ceremony. No crew was aboard, no distress signal was active. The ship had already been judged and found unworthy. In Varkeen records, Commander Threx Alva had signed the final evaluation weeks earlier. His notes were brief and cold. The vessel was structurally inefficient, its propulsion system failed precision standards, its power balance was unstable, it did not meet expansion requirements. For the Varkeen, perfection was the minimum standard, anything less was waste. The ship's final trajectory was calculated quickly. Earth was listed as a developing world, technologically insignificant, and safely distant from Varkeen core space. Dumping the vessel there carried no risk. The Varkeen did not consider that a species still using chemical rockets and crude satellites would be able to learn anything from a broken alien craft. To them, this was no different than dropping scrap into a star or letting it drift until it decayed. Once VX-71 was released, Sector 9 moved on. The collective forgot about it almost immediately. The ship entered Earth's atmosphere days later. Human early warning systems detected an object, but its speed and angle did not match any known missile or satellite. For several tense minutes, military command centers across the world tracked the descent. The object did not maneuver, it did not transmit, it simply fell. The hull burned, but did not break apart the way human-made objects usually did. That alone raised alarms. When it finally crashed into the remote CARICOM exclusion zone, the impact shook the ground for kilometers, yet there was no nuclear signature, no explosion, just a deep scar in the earth and a strange, silent wreck resting at its center. Recovery teams were sent under extreme secrecy. As they approached the crash site, they realized how wrong their initial assumptions had been. The material was not metal in any known sense. It felt warm, almost alive, and small fractures in the hull slowly closed on their own. Radiation levels were low, but unfamiliar. Instruments behaved strangely around the wreck. Even before the first panel was cut open, the truth became clear. This was not human craft. This was something thrown away by someone else. Inside the wreck, there were no bodies, no signs of evacuation, only empty control nodes and dead interfaces covered in symbols no human had ever seen. Some systems were completely destroyed, fused and warped from internal failure rather than external damage. Others still pulsed with faint energy, as if refusing to fully die. To human engineers, this was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. To them, it did not look like trash. It looked like something almost working. What humanity did not know yet was that this moment, this careless dumping from Sector 9, was the first quiet mistake the galaxy would come to regret. The Varkeen believed they had erased a failure. Instead, they had delivered it to a species that did not fear broken things. On that day, without ceremony or intention, humanity received its first gift from the stars, not as a greeting, but as garbage.
The wreck was sealed and moved under the highest level of secrecy to a place known only as Site Black Glass, a hidden research facility built deep underground. The journey alone took days, and every step was watched by soldiers, scientists, and machines designed to record even the smallest change. Once the ship was secured inside the containment chamber, the real work began. Human engineers expected danger, traps, maybe a self-destruction system, but nothing happened. The ship stayed quiet, as if it knew it had already been abandoned. Cutting into the hull was the first challenge. Standard tools failed, lasers scattered, blades dulled within seconds. Only after weeks of testing did the team discover that the material responded not to force, but to pattern. By matching certain energy rhythms, the hull softened just enough to open. This alone shocked the scientists. The ship was not built to resist damage. It was built to refuse clumsy handling. Once inside, the team stepped into a structure that felt wrong and right at the same time. Corridors curved gently, not for style, but for energy flow. Walls carried faint warmth, like something sleeping beneath the surface. As systems were slowly powered for observation, fragments of alien data began to surface. The language was unknown, but the structure of the records was familiar enough for artificial intelligence to begin pattern matching. Over time, short phrases were decoded. These were not mission logs or crew notes. They were evaluations, performance scores, failure reports. One phrase appeared again and again in different forms, unfit for expansion use. Another translated roughly to rejected for inefficiency. The ship had not failed during battle or accident. It had failed during inspection. Deeper in the core section, the team found the reason. The propulsion system was intact, but misaligned by alien standards. Power was distributed unevenly. Safety margins were too wide. To humans, it looked cautious. To the Varkeen collective, it was unacceptable. A recovered data stamp identified the evaluator, Commander Threx Ulva. His final assessment was blunt. The ship consumed too many resources for too little precision. Its systems adapted instead of obeying strict parameters. In short, it behaved unpredictably. That unpredictability was the reason it was scrapped. The power core drew the most attention. It was cracked, but not dead. Energy leaked in small pulses, recycling itself instead of collapsing. Alien engineers had labeled this behavior unstable. Human engineers called it miraculous. When isolated and shielded, the core produced steady output at levels far beyond any reactor Earth had built. It did not burn fuel the way humans understood. It balanced forces, bending loss back into use. It was not clean, it was not elegant, but it worked. The ship's control systems told a similar story. Interfaces were partially corrupted, refusing direct commands, but responding to indirect input. Instead of strict instructions, the systems reacted better to guidance, adjusting behavior based on conditions rather than orders. Alien notes marked this as a flaw. Humans recognized it as adaptability. The ship was not broken in the way humans defined broken. It simply refused to be perfect. As the weeks passed, fear slowly gave way to curiosity. No hidden weapons activated. No signal was sent. Whatever civilization had built this vessel had truly walked away from it. That realization changed everything. This was not a scout, not an invasion probe. It was trash. And that made it safer, but also more dangerous, because trash meant the builders never imagined someone else would pick it up. By the end of the second month, one truth was undeniable. The ship failed because it tried to compromise. It tried to survive damage. It tried to adapt. In a civilization that demanded flawless execution, those traits were weaknesses. On Earth, they were strengths. Humanity stood inside a machine that had been rejected for being too forgiving, too flexible, too human. And in that quiet underground chamber, surrounded by warning labels and armed guards, the first dangerous thought took shape. If this was failure to them, what could it become to us?
The first major decision the humans made was also the simplest one. They stopped trying to make the ship whole again. Early meetings at Site Blackgrass were full of debates about repair and restoration, but those ideas slowly faded. The truth was clear to anyone working close to the wreck. The ship was never going to fly the way its makers intended. Too many systems fought each other, not because they were damaged, but because they were designed to adjust instead of obey. To the aliens, that meant failure. To humans, it meant the ship was alive in its own way. Instead of forcing the systems to behave like alien engineers wanted, humans began to observe how the ship behaved naturally. They watched energy flows shift when conditions changed. They saw materials thicken under stress and relax when pressure dropped. Circuits rerouted themselves after overloads instead of burning out. None of it followed clean logic. Nothing was perfectly efficient, but nothing completely broke either. Human scientists were used to machines that either worked or failed. This ship existed in the space between, and that space fascinated them. Teams stopped asking how to fix it and started asking how to use it. The propulsion array became a laboratory rather than a repair target. When pushed too hard, it destabilized, but when allowed to run at partial capacity, it became stable and predictable. Humans learned that limits were not weaknesses here, they were keys. By accepting lower output, they gained reliability. Alien engineers had demanded maximum performance at all times. Humans were comfortable with turning the dial down. The same pattern appeared everywhere. Hull fragments that were considered defective showed remarkable strength when layered with human alloys. The alien material did not resist damage, it adapted to it. When cracked, it redistributed stress. When heated, it absorbed energy instead of warping. Engineers joked that the ship behaved like a stubborn animal rather than a machine. It refused perfection, but rewarded patience. Human culture played a quiet but important role. Many of the engineers working on VX-71 had grown up fixing broken tools, old vehicles, and outdated machines. They were used to making things work with missing parts and bad designs. Where the aliens saw design flaws, humans saw challenges. They taped over problems, rerouted systems, and added layers instead of removing them. It was messy, it was inefficient, but it worked. One breakthrough came when a junior technician connected a human control interface not directly to the alien systems, but through a translator layer that offered suggestions instead of commands. The ship responded instantly. Systems stabilized, power fluctuations smoothed out. It was as if the ship wanted cooperation, not control. That moment changed everything. Humans realized the vessel was not built to be ordered, it was built to negotiate with reality. Fear continued to fade. The ship did not hide weapons, it did not defend itself. It behaved like something that had already accepted its fate. That made the work safer, but also heavier. The realization grew that the builders had never tried to understand this design. They had judged it against rigid standards and thrown it away. Humans felt an unexpected connection to that failure. They knew what it was like to be imperfect in a universe that demanded success. As months passed, the ship slowly lost its identity as a single object. It became a collection of ideas, a power system here, a material sample there, a logic method copied into human software. VX-71 stopped being a ship and became a teacher. It showed humans a different way of thinking about technology, not as something that must be flawless, but as something that must endure. By the end of this phase, no one at Site Blackgrass talked about returning the ship to space. That dream was gone. In its place was something more dangerous and more promising. Humanity had learned that failure was not the end of usefulness, it was often the beginning. And if this broken alien design could survive conditions its creators feared, then perhaps humans could take those lessons and build something of their own, something never meant to be perfect, only meant to last. The shift from study to action happened quietly. There was no announcement, no speech, and no moment that history books would highlight. One day, the scientists at Site Blackglass were observing alien systems, and the next, they were planning how to reuse them. The project was given an internal name, Salvage Dawn, not for publicity, but for clarity. The goal was no longer understanding alone. The goal was transformation. The first step was dismantling the ship in a controlled way. Every piece was cataloged, mapped, and tested. The hull was cut into sections and moved to separate labs. When human alloys were fused with the alien material, something unexpected happened. The alien layers did not resist the foreign metal, they bonded to it. Under stress tests, the combined plates performed better than either material alone. Cracks slowed, impacts spread out instead of tearing through, and heat dispersed naturally. What the aliens had labeled flawed construction became the strongest armor humans had ever tested. The power core presented the greatest risk. Alien records had warned repeatedly about its instability. Early experiments confirmed the danger. When pushed toward its original operating levels, the core reacted violently. Energy surged without pattern. Systems around it failed. But when engineers limited its output and added human regulation systems, the behavior changed. The core settled. It pulsed slowly, steadily, like a controlled heartbeat. Scientists realized the core was not unstable by nature. It was over-designed for perfection. By accepting lower efficiency, humans gained safety and control. Human engineers made a choice the aliens never would have made. They accepted waste. They accepted heat loss, delay, and redundancy. Extra layers were added, backup systems were installed. Where alien designs aimed for elegant minimalism, humans embraced bulk and margin. The result was technology that was heavier, slower, and far more forgiving. It could be damaged and still function. It could be pushed and recover. This philosophy spread through the entire project. As subsystems were separated, their true value became clear. Energy routing techniques were adapted into human grids. Sensor components were repurposed for long-range detection. Structural patterns inspired new construction methods. Nothing was copied directly. Everything was adjusted. Engineers often said they were translating ideas, not stealing designs. The alien ship was no longer a template. It was raw material. There was resistance at first. Some officials feared retaliation. Others worried about dependence on alien technology. But those concerns faded as results appeared. Prototype armor panels survived impacts that would have destroyed tanks. Experimental power units ran for months without fuel replacement. Every success made it harder to argue for stopping. Humanity was not building alien machines. Humanity was building human machines that happened to use alien lessons. Security around the project tightened. Information was compartmentalized. Very few people understood the full picture. To the outside world, nothing had changed, but beneath the surface, Earth was crossing a line it could never uncross. For the first time, human technology was no longer bound by purely human limits. The emotional tone inside Site Blackglass changed as well. Fear gave way to confidence. The ship that once felt like a threat now felt like a tool. Engineers stopped asking whether they should continue and started asking how far they could go. The alien failure had become a foundation. By the end of this phase, the original ship barely existed as a single object. It had been taken apart, studied, and reborn in pieces. Salvage Dawn had done more than recycle wreckage. It had proven a dangerous idea. That technology rejected by one civilization could become the strength of another. Humanity was no longer just studying the stars, it was preparing to stand under them.
By the time the year 2143 arrived, humanity had moved beyond experiments. The broken alien ship had been transformed into lessons, materials, and engines of possibility. Project Salvage Dawn had produced its first tangible outcome.
the first hybrid human fleet, designed to protect Earth using technology no one had imagined before. The flagship of this new fleet was HSS Resolve, commanded by Captain Elias Ward, a man known for patience as much as courage. The second vessel, HSS Iron Wake, was under Captain Mira Cade, a brilliant tactician who understood that innovation often came from improvisation rather than perfection. These ships were not sleek or elegant. They were practical, powerful, and stubborn, much like the humans who built them. The hulls were covered in layered armor that combined alien alloys with human metals. To the untrained eye, the ships looked bulky and awkward. They lacked symmetry, and their engines emitted a low hum rather than a silent glide. Yet every panel, every circuit, every subsystem had been tested and retested to survive damage that would destroy ordinary craft. Humans had learned to accept waste. Extra layers, redundant circuits, and inefficient energy paths were no longer flaws. They were insurance. If one system failed, the fleet would continue. If one engine burned out, the ship would not crash. Where the Varkeen valued flawless perfection, humans valued survival. Weapons came next. Alien energy cores that were deemed unstable were stabilized and reworked into human systems. The result was not clean or elegant. Power pulses fluctuated and beams flickered under strain, but they hit with devastating force. Systems that the Varkeen had called too unpredictable for combat became the backbone of Earth's defensive arsenal. Engineers joked that the ships were like children wielding hammers, but those hammers worked. The fleet was no longer studying failure, it was using it as a weapon. Humanity's new ships were not intended for exploration or diplomacy. They were designed for a single purpose: protection. The Varkeen had assumed Earth would remain insignificant, too weak to matter. Humans assumed nothing. Every system was tested for endurance. Every weapon was simulated against the impossible. The fleet was prepared not for a single scenario, but for anything that might come from the stars. In training exercises, even the most advanced human pilots marveled at the way the alien-derived systems reacted to unexpected input. The fleet was alive in its own way, responding instead of obeying. Captains Ward and Cade approached the challenge differently, but both understood the lesson from the failed ship. The fleet could not rely on precision alone. Decisions had to account for errors, unpredictability, and compromise. In simulations, Captain Ward often allowed small failures to occur, observing how the fleet adapted. Captain Cade ran drills where engines misfired or energy beams fluctuated. Each exercise proved that human creativity and patience could overcome what alien design considered fatal flaws. The first deployment of the fleet was modest but symbolic. Small scouting missions into Earth orbit and near space were enough to demonstrate the fleet's readiness. Observers noticed the hum of hybrid engines, the faint glow of alien power cores, and the unusual resilience of the armor. Ships survived conditions that would have destroyed conventional craft, and their performance exceeded expectations in unpredictable ways. Engineers who had worked for years on Project Salvage Dawn watched as their labor, once just a collection of discarded pieces, became a force to be reckoned with. On board the HSS Resolve, Captain Ward often walked the corridors, inspecting systems and speaking quietly with his crew. He reminded them constantly that their advantage was not alien perfection, but human adaptability. On the Iron Wake, Captain Cade pushed her officers to understand the subtle ways the ship responded. Both captains knew that in the event of conflict, survival depended not on weapons alone, but on judgment, flexibility, and the willingness to improvise. By the end of this phase,
Earth had changed in ways that no one outside Site Blackglass fully understood. A fleet born from a rejected alien vessel existed not to copy its creators, but to surpass them in unexpected ways. Humanity had learned to take discarded failure and make it into a shield. The lessons from VX-71 had transformed into something far greater. Ships, captains, and crews ready to defend a planet that the galaxy had assumed was insignificant. And in doing so, humans had begun to show that discarded tools could become the strongest weapons of all.
Months after the first hybrid human fleet had been deployed, a signal arrived. It came from deep space, precise and cold, transmitted across distances only the most advanced alien civilizations could manage. The source was traced back to Sector 9, the same place where VX-71 had been discarded years earlier. Human analysts were cautious. The signal carried no attack, no threat at first glance, only a message written in the unmistakable structure of the Varkeen Collective. It was signed by High Commander Threats Ulva, the same official who had marked the alien ship unfit and sent it away. His name alone carried weight across alien networks, commanding fear and respect in civilizations far older than Earth. The message was brief, almost contemptuous. It mocked humanity for touching something they had no right to manipulate. The text described the ship's systems as disposable and insignificant, reiterating what had been logged years before. The Varkeen noted that their failure had been intentional and that humans had no understanding of the complexities involved. They warned Earth to dismantle the fleet immediately, to abandon the alien cores and armor, and to forget the lessons of VX-71. To them, it was a polite warning. To humans, it was an insult. Inside Site Blackglass and aboard the hybrid fleet, reactions varied. Some officials suggested compliance, fearing the might of the Varkeen if provoked. But the captains and engineers who had spent years studying and transforming the wreckage saw something else: arrogance. The Varkeen had assumed that humanity, a species still dependent on chemical rockets in some areas, would obey without understanding. They believed Earth would crumble before the weight of alien expectations. Humans did not. Captain Elias Ward read the message aloud to his crew on the HSS Resolve, not as a warning, but as proof that they had exceeded the aliens' predictions. Captain Mira Kay did the same on the Iron Wake. Both understood the psychological power of the signal. The enemy was underestimating them. Technical teams analyzed the transmission carefully. It contained patterns of data meant to test human systems, hidden instructions, and subtle references to VX-71's original design. Some engineers thought these were traps designed to destabilize or corrupt human adaptations. Others saw them as opportunities, subtle clues about how the Varkeen Collective viewed their technology. Every line of the message was scrutinized, every nuance recorded. Nothing was ignored. Even arrogance, it turned out, could be useful if understood correctly. Despite the threat implied in the message, the fleet continued its exercises and expansions. Earth's leaders understood that dismantling the hybrid ships would not erase the knowledge gained from VX-71. The lessons were already integrated into human engineering practices, power grids, and defense systems. Humanity had transformed failure into a tool, and tools could not be unlearned. The message, instead of stopping progress, strengthened the resolve of everyone involved. Humans realized that what the aliens had discarded could survive their criticism, adapt, and even thrive. The message also carried an unintended revelation. It exposed the Varkeen's priorities. High Commander Threx Olva and his superiors valued perfection above all else. Systems that adjusted, adapted, or compromised were considered failures. That rigidity revealed a weakness humans could exploit. Creativity and patience could surpass raw precision. This understanding spread among officers and engineers, becoming almost a mantra for the fleet. Predictability is a weakness, flexibility is strength. Humans learned that the Varkeen's pride in flawless systems had blinded them to the potential of what they had thrown away. As the fleet continued its development, the signal remained a constant reminder. Every captain and engineer knew the Varkeen were watching, confident that humans would fail under pressure. But confidence was not a threat to humans, it was motivation. It encouraged experimentation, encouraged problem-solving under constraints, and encouraged embracing systems that behaved unpredictably. VX-71 had failed according to alien rules, but humans were rewriting those rules in real time. By the time the weeks passed, the fleet was stronger, the crews more experienced, and Earth more prepared than the Varkeen could imagine. The message from Commander Threx Olva had been intended as a deterrent, a show of power. Instead, it served as proof of humanity's ingenuity. The alien arrogance had underestimated not just human technology, but human persistence, adaptability, and courage. Earth was no longer passive, it was watching, learning, and preparing, and the Varkeen message would be remembered not as a warning, but as the moment humans realized just how far they could go when faced with the dismissal of a galaxy that thought them weak.
The first real test of humanity's hybrid fleet came sooner than anyone expected. Alien scouts from Sector 9 Patrol Wing 17 had been quietly observing the solar system, watching Earth's development from afar. They moved with speed and precision, assuming that humans would remain predictable, slow, and easy to intimidate. The Varkeen Collective had no reason to think otherwise. After all, the humans had no history of handling technology beyond their own crude systems. The scouts assumed Earth's fleet could never function in a combat situation, especially not with salvaged alien cores. When the scouts entered the outer reaches of the solar system, they encountered something entirely different. The HSS Resolve and HSS Iron Wake had already been deployed in advanced positions, monitoring and reacting to potential threats. Sensors detected the scouts almost immediately. Unlike human ships of old, these hybrids could respond to unpredictable maneuvers. The alien vessels moved with confidence, expecting compliance. Instead, they were met with resistance the Varkeen never imagined possible. Captain Elias Ward, aboard the Resolve, gave a single order: engage, observe, adapt. The fleet did not fire blindly. Systems powered up with a hum that was half alien, half human. Energy beams pulsed from the hybrid weapons, unstable by alien standards, but deadly to those unprepared. The first strike was not perfectly precise. It wavered, flickered, and jumped between targets. But that unpredictability made it harder for the scouts to avoid. The alien ships sustained damage that shocked even the most experienced human engineers. Hull plating warped under energy pulses, sensors scrambled, and propulsion systems slowed. For the first time, the Varkeen realized that their assessment of humanity had been wrong. Captain Mira Cade on the Iron Wake coordinated attacks differently. She relied on human improvisation, sending unpredictable patterns, feints, and decoys. The scouts tried to track, calculate, and counter, but every move they predicted failed. The hybrid systems responded in real time to conditions they could not control, and the humans were ready. The battle unfolded not with elegance, but with raw adaptability. Missiles and energy blasts struck unevenly but effectively, disabling engines, crippling shields, and forcing retreat. The alien scouts attempted to regroup and communicate warnings back to Sector 9, but the fleet's interference disrupted their signals. Every maneuver they executed to regain advantage was anticipated by the hybrid ships, not because humans had perfect control, but because humans expected unpredictability. VX-71 had taught humans a lesson the Varkeen never intended to give. Systems that adapt instead of obey could survive against perfection. As the scouts retreated, the human fleet held position, unbroken. There was no celebration, no fanfare. Officers and crews simply monitored the situation, confirming damage and assessing performance. For the first time, humans had proven that discarded alien technology could not only be used, but could outperform the expectations of its creators. Every subsystem, every hybrid modification, every lesson learned from Salvage Dawn had contributed to the success. When reports reached Site Blackglass, engineers could hardly believe the results. Data collected from the fleet's sensors showed patterns the alien creators had never accounted for. Their systems had been tested against rigidity, and humans had exploited every weakness. The hybrid ships had survived unpredictability, and in doing so, demonstrated the potential of combining alien ingenuity with human adaptability. The message from the scouts was clear. Earth was no longer insignificant. The Varkeen, who had assumed the planet would obey or crumble, now faced evidence that humans were not just clever, but dangerous in a way the collective had not considered. Their arrogance in discarding VX-71 had backfired spectacularly. The failed ship had become the foundation for a fleet capable of defending an entire planet against civilizations that considered Earth unworthy of attention. By the end of the engagement, the human fleet remained fully operational. Damage to the hybrid ships was minimal compared to the scout vessels. Lessons were logged, adjustments were made, and confidence among crews surged. Humanity had proven not only that they could handle alien technology, but that they could turn what was considered useless into a strategic advantage. The event marked the first moment in history when humans demonstrated that discarded tools could outperform the very species that had thrown them away. It was a quiet victory, but it echoed across the galaxy, proving that Earth was ready to stand, adapt, and survive, no matter who or what watched from the stars.
By the late 22nd century, humanity had grown into something the galaxy had not expected. VX-71, the alien ship that had once been labeled useless and discarded, had never flown again, but its influence was everywhere. The lessons learned from its design, its failures, and its adaptability had transformed human engineering, strategy, and even philosophy. Ships built from its parts were no longer just experiments, they were a permanent part of Earth's defense, and they carried a lesson that extended far beyond technology. Value could be found in what others threw away. Humanity's hybrid fleet, including the HSS Resolve and the Iron Wake, had become symbols of persistence. They were not sleek or perfect, they were heavy, loud, and unpredictable. Every engineer, captain, and officer who had worked on the fleet knew that these flaws were the fleet's greatest strength. Where alien civilizations sought perfection, humans sought survival. Where aliens feared failure, humans learned from it. The discarded ship had taught Earth that resilience often mattered more than precision, and flexibility more than flawless design. The Varkeen Collective eventually understood that Earth was no longer passive. Patrols that once assumed compliance now approached with caution. Commanders like Threx Ulva had assumed that humans would be easily intimidated. That arrogance had been proven wrong. The hybrid's performance against alien scouts and automated systems demonstrated that discarded tools, when handled with creativity and patience, could become powerful weapons. Humanity had transformed failure into dominance without firing the first intentional shot against a major civilization. Within human society, the influence of VX-71 extended beyond military applications.
Engineers applied its principles to energy grids, building systems that could survive partial collapse without losing power. Cities incorporated adaptive materials inspired by the ship's hull, able to withstand earthquakes, storms, and other natural disasters. Even human decision-making began to reflect lessons from the failed vessel. Problem-solving now involved adaptability and learning from errors instead of punishing them. Humanity had embraced a mindset that aliens considered inefficient, but which allowed humans to grow stronger faster than anyone anticipated. Captain Elias Ward often reflected on what the ship had meant for the fleet. On the HSS Resolve, he walked past panels and engines that had once been part of VX-71, now modified and stabilized. He understood that the ship itself was not the weapon, it was the ideas it carried. Captain Mira Cade felt the same on the Iron Wake, knowing that human crews now relied on intuition, adaptation, and courage more than rigid protocols. Their success was proof that a civilization's greatest advantage could come from something others dismissed as worthless. In the wider galaxy, the lesson did not go unnoticed. The Varkeen Collective, once so confident, adjusted their strategic manuals to include a warning: never discard technology near Earth. They had underestimated a species that refused to see waste as worthless, a species that could weaponize failure itself. Across distant systems, the reputation of humanity began to grow quietly but steadily. Civilizations that had once ignored Earth now monitored it carefully, unsure what else humans might salvage and transform. The philosophy extended to the younger generations as well. Students studying engineering, physics, and space exploration were taught the story of VX-71. They learned that creativity could turn broken systems into innovation, that perseverance could turn failure into survival, and that understanding complexity did not require perfect comprehension. Earth's culture began to value flexibility, patience, and courage alongside technical skill. The failed alien ship had reshaped a planet not just physically, but mentally and socially. By the time humans looked outward to the stars again, they were no longer naive observers. Earth had grown into a civilization capable of defending itself, learning from discarded alien technology, and creating systems that could survive against forces far older and more advanced. VX-71 had never flown again, but it had become more than a ship. It had become a symbol, a teacher, and a foundation. Humanity had shown that the measure of strength was not perfection, but persistence. What other civilizations rejected as useless, humans had turned into power, protection, and progress. In a galaxy that had once ignored them, Earth had found its voice, its shield, and its legacy, all born from something thrown away.